In this video, we are going to discuss the digestive system's histology. So if you remember histology, histology is the study of the cells that make up the digestive system, as well as the tissues. So cells and tissues. So with that said, when we're looking at the alimentary canal, right, it's essentially a tube. So if we're looking at a tube, which we're going to look at this next one, right? So this tube, it's kind of funky looking, right? But like there should be an outside and an inside hole to the tube. So I'm going to color the lumen or the hole in blue. So this is the inside of the tube, and this is where the food is going to pass through, right? So this is called the lumen. Lumen just refers to the hole or opening, right? So with that said, this is a tube. There's multiple layers to this tube. So we have that blue section, which it is colored in, which is that lumen, the hole, and then we have all the other tissues that surround it. So just keep that in mind as we discuss this. So there are four major layers to this tube. The innermost layer is the mucosal layer. So the mucosal layer is going to be primarily made of epithelium, as well as connective tissue and smooth muscle. And their job is to, if you remember back when we were talking about histology earlier in Anatomy 1, the epithelium is going to help us to provide protection, as well as secretion and absorption. These are some of the major functions of the epithelium, depending on what type of epithelial cells we have. We'll be talking about specific ones in a minute. We also have these connective tissues and smooth muscle tissues that help us as well with protection. Next, we have the submucosa. So sub means under. So this is the layer under the mucosal layer. So if we look here, we have our mucosal layer, which I'll do in red. So we have this mucosal layer that surrounds the lumen. This is our mucosal layer. I'm going to stop here, but you get the idea. And then our submucosal layer, I'll do in orange. So it's under it. It's the white part here. Right, so now you're starting to see where these layers are. So what does it do? The submucosal layer is primarily made of connective tissues, as well as the blood vessels and lymphatic vessels that carry blood and lymph throughout the alimentary canal. There's also nerves in here that help us with understanding what hormones we may need to release into the alimentary canal, as well as just in general being able to sense throughout that system. What does it do? Because of the blood vessels, it helps to nourish the area and surrounding tissues. Because again, every cell in the body needs energy. So yes, the role of this is to absorb as many materials as possible, right? That's the job of the digestive system. Break down food so we can absorb it into our bloodstream. However, it doesn't mean that we don't need energy ourselves, right? These tissues still need all those nutrients as well. So we're going to provide it through the submucosal layer. Next is the muscular layer. This is primarily made of smooth muscle, meaning that it works by itself. You don't have to think about it. It's involuntary. And these are arranged in circular and longitudinal groups. Why is that? Because it helps us to move or propel the food through the canal. Right? So they're going to work together. They're going to alternate. One will contract, one will relax. And it'll help push the food through. And lastly, we have the serosal layer. And the serosal layer is primarily made of epithelium and connective tissues, and it provides protection and lubrication. So these are the layers of the alimentary canal. And again, here's an image of it. And here's another image here. Here's one last image, but also a little bit of information. So if we're looking at the esophagus, for example, if we're looking at an esophagus, so the esophagus is the tube that runs from the mouth to the stomach. So that's the esophagus, right? So you have your mouth at the top and your stomach at the bottom. So it's a tube that runs from your mouth to your stomach. My drawing is not that good, but I think you get the point. So if you have food sliding through your esophagus, no matter what you're eating, whether it's water or if you're eating chips, whatever you're eating, if you're swallowing it and it's going to rub up against the inside of that tube, right? So it's going to cause friction. So because of that, we want to make sure that the esophagus is protected. We want to make sure it's strong so it doesn't just cut open. So we are going to use stratified squamous epithelial tissue. We discussed this in Anatomy 1, but the idea is we have these stratified squamous, which are these really thin cells, but they're stacked up on top of each other. Right? So the more you have, the more layers you have, the more protection, and they're thin, which makes them cheap. So if you damage them, you can just grow more. Really easy. Right? So these are the kinds of tissues we want in your esophagus. However, when you're looking at something like your stomach, as we move down, we have these simple columnar tissues, which are the ones that look like columns. Right? Again, these are really important for absorption, to help us to absorb the food that we are breaking down. And the last slide to discuss here is the greater omentum. So the greater omentum is basically it's kind of like a blanket inside your abdomen that covers most of the digestive system. So your intestines and your accessory organs. It is loaded with blood vessels so they can make sure that they get proper nutrients, but also connective tissues like fat, which again, the fat will give it some energy if it needs it, but also it kind of just keeps all of these organs in the same place because we don't want our organs to just start falling around or start moving around while we're digesting or while we're moving throughout the day. So the greater omentum helps, 1, give it protection, 2, give it nutrients, and 3, just keep everything in the same location, right? Give it some structure. So with that said, if you have any questions on the digestive system histology, let me know. The next video we are going to start talking about the anatomy of the stomach.